My name's Caroline Deer. I'm an artist. I've been living on Skye for over 30 years. And I trained in architecture and I did botany for a while, and I'm really interested in structures. And one of the early things I learned was how people made rope traditionally with plant materials. And so I've been working with plants using different techniques over that period and looking at historical evidence, cultural evidence in the Highlands in particular. And for this exhibition, I got a grant from Creative Scotland, and I've been working with Karen Hardy, who's an archaeologist who's specialised in the Paleolithic, which is more than 10,000 years ago. And so that's really interesting. And this exhibition then has brought, we've looked at that early period, and then I brought in different references, all different ways that we've used string or evidence of string in different ways. So this piece is a sort of small scale sack, which was inspired from this quote, which was from Alexander Nicholson's History of Skye book. So until about 1840, all sacks for holding grain were made locally from sedges or from straw. So to me, that little simple statement, I thought, wow, all sacks on Skye were made from sedge or straw. So who's making them? Where are they gathering them? When are they gathering? How long does the sack last? To make this small sack here, I made 40 metres of rush rope here. So this is soft rush I've used, and this is soft rush for the verticals. This is the technique that would have been used. It's based on the technique that's still in use in Shetland for making the Shetland kishie. And I think that's probably what would have been used. It's a binding, twining. But to me, that it was like, what's happening in the landscape? Who's making? They're constantly busy making, gathering. You know, the materials would have run out. Yeah, so that just a little quote like that can open up a huge area. So you always, when you're making rope, you need to know how much rope you need. So there's a quote here you need 40 fathoms of Floss Simmons rush rope before you start a kishie, which is the Shetland basket. So, and you'd measure a fathom so all the measurements often would relate to your body. So thinking about measurement, and you need to know how many, if you're plying, you need to have 3, and then 3 plies up. And weaving comes into it really early on. So you're threading your loom, and you're making cloth. So weaving, so at the beginning when I came into the archive, I'd never heard of these sample books that they had, and they're really exciting. What's interesting is the variety, huge variety, 3 different books, which just show a multitude and the orders taken and all different, and this isn't that long ago that people were using these and stuff was being woven. This is a poem from Alexander Carmichael's Carmina Gadelica, which I just love. It's when you're setting up the loom on the vertical, the warp, and so you've got this rhythm and things, you black by the white by the black, the green in the middle of the red, so you get the pattern right. And then it's the weft is just one colour, so you've got these vertical stripes with the finished piece. This piece is based on, I've called it what we've lost, lost knowledge. This is based on the kipu of the South American people, which they used for hundreds of years, thousands of years, different groups of people in order to structure their society. They didn't have writing, and this was how they encoded information. So we destroyed several, and we've only got a little bit, so people don't know exactly how the information was encoded. But they used knots, they used twisting in different directions, they used different materials. So this is just a reference to all that information. But it's thinking about different ways that information can be encoded within something simple as a knot. So this is looking at the archaeological evidence, and I've made a series of some of the replicas of actually old ropes. So this is a replica of the rope which was found in Lascaux Caves, so that's about 17,000 years ago. And it's 3-ply made out of other 3 different ropes. So possibly bast. I've made this one out of lime bast, and I've made the size that it was. They've got a plaster cast, but they've lost the actual original bit of rope and they couldn't identify the plants used. So there's different early techniques and things here. So one of the things that really inspired me in terms of the early archaeological research that I was doing was they made really thin rope and they made netting a long, long time ago. So one of these is based on there's a rope which was found in the Baltic Sea called the Antrea net, and it was found totally intact. It's in the museum in Helsinki, and that's made out of willow bast, which is 3 millimeters thin, and the knot that's used is the same standard netting knot that's used nowadays. So these are made out of different materials, which some of them are associated with old materials that were used, like nettle and stuff. And this one here is made out of sedge leaves, and I've used the knot is based on Neolithic evidence from netting from the Switzerland excavations. So that's different types of knot and things. Part of the exhibition is this is a collection of my own ropes that I've gathered from different old houses or that I've found in different places. So some of them are made out of rush or marram, heather, and these are more recent ones which I think are coir. So there's something very special about having artifacts that show how things were used, show how materials were used. There's different ways that ropes were made here. So these boxes show the different plants that were used for making rope. And I've tried to list the uses and things as well, like bog cotton, for example. There's myths related to bog cotton being used, and I wasn't sure if it was really possible. But I've seen some work in the museum in Kirkwall, which is made out of bog cotton. So there's part of this section, it was looking at the different materials that people used. So one of the interesting things working with the archive, I really like how everything ties together and links up, and there's always like another element, the kind of mystical element beside, maths and measurement and practical gathering of your materials. So there's a long tradition in the Highlands of thread being used as a charm or a healing or beneficial in some way. So there was a widespread charm in the Highlands is Iollas and Snarf, the charm of the threads. And red thread in particular was always, well, in fact, it's a worldwide thing in many different cultures, seen as a healing. I've got this piece which is where people can help themselves to a red thread. It's just called We All Need Healing. So it's just a reference to maybe taking care of yourself and thinking about different ways that we actually had the Chilean people visiting here, and they all came up and they said they've also got the same stories when babies are born. They have a red thread tied around them, and I just thought that was really interesting. So some of these artefacts are from the archives here in Portree, and we've got quotes from texts, mystery materials, a lovely piece of lace work on the edge of a linen top, and some earlier stone tools and photographs, and an old fishing float. So rope, in fact, some of the tools is spindle wells. There's a whole different thing about spinning and spindle wells. That's a big, wide tradition. So spindle wells is a huge, big area of related to rope and making thread. So this is one of the ones from these 3 are from the archive in Portree, and there's lots that are always found. So they could be spindle wells. They could also be weights from looms. This is decorated, and it's got, this really decorated on both sides with dots. What I've discovered with spinning is that there's a whole technological expertise, depending on the thinness of the thread you want to spin, what the weight of the spindle is, and the materials that are used, which is really interesting. So they're made out of all different materials. So a poem I wrote, which I think ties everything together, but also links with our contemporary society relating to string. String is really, really old. So the earliest known bit of string that we know of at the moment is 47,000 years old, that humans made. That was 3-ply. So string begat weaving, begat looms, begat computers, begat the web. And for those of you who don't know, looms led directly to computers, because when you're weaving, the thread is either in place or not in order to make the pattern. And they developed the jacquard loom, which had punch cards with holes in them, and that led directly to the binary system, which developed the computer. So this kind of comes full circle in terms of thinking about, as an archaeologist, if you were excavating, what would you find that relates to string? And often there would be nothing that was absolutely obvious. So these two boxes are called, this is called Vestiges of String. So we've looked at language, and then thinking about objects that you would use to organise string, so things that you wind string on, and it might just be a little bit of wood or a folded bit of paper. There's one site, Must Farm, a Neolithic site, where they found bobbins of thread that they've made, which are really lovely. So, this is a way of organising string. And these are tools that I use in my studio when I'm working with string, so wooden needles or wooden stick or bit of bone. So if you found that in an archaeological excavation, you wouldn't really know that it was a useful tool. So it's just thinking different ways to look at different things. So language is a whole nother area where we've got remnants of the use and knowledge of string and Gaelic in particular. So I've been working with Katharine Macfarlane, the poet, and we've looked at all different words in Gaelic which relate, and sayings which relate to how much it was part of life. So, Ise an tres dual neart and topa. The strength of the rope lies in the third strand. So that's actually really meaningful. When you ply 3 ropes together, that gives a rope of much stronger strength. And then there's somebody put in the visitor's book, I recall my neighbour in Lewis being described as a 2-strand person, i.e. they weren't all there and short of a strand for the full twine, which I thought was really interesting.
Textile. Each twist and turn of the rope brings purpose to fingers and rushes. The shuttle back and forth speaks meaning back into being. Language, which tripped off tongues for generations, awakens from silence and stretches the thin thread through millennia as songs of Shinjirin soar in voices which have echoed in the sweep of wind across hillside, in the stench of a sheep fount, the turn of a wheel and the clack of needles. A smile, to find our faces here, welcome with each turn. Sit for a time, as roots wind around ankles, stories gather, tether, bind.